API Resilience podcast. It's our belief that APIs are central in the changing business landscape that has been named digital transformation, and that digital transformation through APIs offers the opportunity for a dramatic shift in how companies can work together and participate in creating value. We've invited guests from many different types of organizations and asked them to share insights from their journeys and their API programs, as well as the challenges, objectives, and approaches as they endeavor to make their companies and communities more resilient.
It's been really beneficial to shift people's thinking to the beginning so that they're thinking about, is this API going to be easy for our customers to use? Is this API secure from the start? And not just looking at the architecture at the beginning, but also looking at the inputs and outputs of the API itself. APIs are really the foundation of everything that we do today, but nobody talks about them like that. They talk about the sites and shopping carts. A lot of the things that we're working on are starting to go really well for us. They're not customer visible yet. You can't go out and see the transformation that's happening.
Now let's listen to today's conversation. Hello and welcome to the API Resilience podcast. I'm Mark Winberry, co-host of this podcast episode with Kristufek. I'm very pleased to introduce today's guest, Jeannie Hawrysz, lead API architect and manager of API and developer program at SAS. That's capital SAS. And you can follow her on Twitter at JKHAWRYSZ. That's Hawrysz. And we're really happy to have you on the podcast today, Jeannie. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I didn't know a lot about SAS, and I looked it up. I used to be a mathematician. Well, I shouldn't say that. I majored in mathematics and came to love statistical analysis, which surprised me because my first statistics class I didn't really enjoy. And then I had a project that was so much fun working with real data and some software from ancient times. You can see that I'm pretty old because of my gray beard. But thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the API program at SAS?
Sure. I don't know where to start exactly. So our API program at SAS is really kind of at the beginning. We've had sort of technical governance around our APIs for years now, where we require people to follow standards. So we have had a standard in place for a long time. We have required people to document with OpenAPI for a long time. But now we're really starting to think about how do we take some of those APIs and make them external for customers. And that's also aligned with a broader software as a service, APIs as a service, APIs as a product strategy at SAS. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you today, because for the longest time, a lot of the good things that we were doing from an API programming perspective weren't really visible to customers, but we're really starting to take that head on now. We have a good foundation, a good technical foundation, but putting that big business governance around our APIs is really a priority for us going forward.
And it's really during the pandemic that you really started gearing up and accelerating. So that must have been very exciting, interesting times, like on multiple levels.
Oh, man, it's been crazy. So it's been interesting. So I can give you a little bit of history here. So when I first came into this role at SAS in 2017, I was really like the only person kind of working in the governance space around APIs at SAS. We had an API Center of Excellence, which was kind of a volunteer organization at the time, where we had technical people embedded in each of our microservices teams, and they were responsible for helping guide the governance for each of those microservices. But I would say, like, right before the pandemic, we did, I think it was the week before everybody was told that they needed to stay home all the time. We did a pitch to our leadership, our executive leadership, saying that, we wanted to do more investment in APIs, and we had a plan for what this was going to look like moving forward. And slowly, since we've been home, we've been amassing more people to our team. And it's been very interesting. We have these team calls on Friday where our team gets together and we talk, we just talk to each other rather than have, important business meeting. We're talking about like our lives and stuff. And we realized that a number of the people that had joined the team and were instrumental in moving our kind of priorities for this business facing API stuff forward, we had never met them in person yet, which is just crazy because we're all located in North Carolina and we all have offices. So SAS is located in Cary, North Carolina, and we were all used to driving to the office every day and seeing each other every day. But like so many of the people that have joined our team, I've never actually met in person, but I feel like I have because I see them on these Teams calls like every day. It's been really surreal and very weird. But now I'm wondering, is it going to be weird when we go back and have to see everybody in person again?
That's an interesting question because as I think about how teams that I've worked with have grown in the physical spaces that we've been, the physical space impacts the team. Yeah, it will be interesting. I bet there will be some interesting dynamics that change.
I'm hoping it's for the better, though, because one of the big things that we had pitched right before we all went on pandemic home leave was that we got involved with this. We have a design team, like design organization at SAS, and we started to get involved with them in conducting API workshops. So API design first workshops, which is pretty much a big cultural revolution at SAS, this whole notion of really being design driven, design first. And I had never really worked from a user experience perspective, so I had to learn what UX was and what design thinking was and how to apply that to APIs. But I know that other people on the outside are doing that. Yeah, outside of SAS are doing that as well. And I think it's been really tremendously beneficial to kind of shift people's thinking to the beginning so that they're thinking about things like, is this API going to be easy for our customers to use? Is this API secure from the start? Is this API going to perform well? And not just looking at the architecture at the beginning, but also looking at the inputs and outputs of the API itself. There's a learning curve for that for our design team as well, because they're used to looking at graphical, visual interfaces rather than APIs. And my argument is that it's not that much different. They're all interfaces. It's just a different audience. And we're all kind of learning together. I'm learning the techniques from them and they're learning stuff about, the bits and bytes of the APIs. And there fortunately are a number of tools that can really help sort of visualize what the API is going to look like and they draw graphs on the wall and stuff. One of our API workshops early on in the pandemic was virtual, which was kind of scary because they'd never done a design workshop virtually anyways. And one of the first ones was an API design workshop, but that really worked out very well. And, it was a learning curve for all of us, but I think we have good tools in place to be able to do this going forward if we have to.
I think it's really awesome that you're starting with design. That is a best practice that people often don't follow. A lot of times because they're working with existing APIs that they're exposing. And I guess one question I have for you is, are you wrapping up existing APIs and presenting them as new APIs, or is this truly completely new API development?
Both. So ideally, like I keep saying, like I wish we could, wipe the slate clean and kind of just start over again, but that's not realistic. We are a 40-year-old company, 40-plus-year-old company, we have APIs that have evolved in different formats over many, many years. So we can't just, throw everything out and start over again. There will be APIs that are wrappers for existing APIs that sort of obfuscate the underlying low-level APIs that sit in the platform. But I think that there are also going to be more standalone APIs that maybe just are simple services that sit in the cloud. All of this, I'm not making any market promises here for sure, but all of this is on the table. And if there are people out there that are SaaS customers or are interested in analytics APIs, we are more than open to really getting requirements from the field as well. We have a very rich platform of analytics capabilities, but in terms of API product offerings, like the sky's the limit. But we want to make sure that we build things that people are going to use and that people are going to want. and any feedback. We're very, very interested in understanding the customer landscape better. One of the big things that we've done over the last year, in addition to incorporating design into our processes, is we've gotten an overall product manager for the API landscape. And we're going to be working together to figure out what those APIs look like. But we want to make sure that we're not just getting our requirements from people within SAS. Like, we want to be getting them from people outside of SAS as well. And then I go and I look at some of the articles and blogs that have been coming out, and people are talking about analytics APIs and data management APIs as being kind of a hot topic. And I'm like, I want to be a part of that. So we're very interested, and we're very motivated to get this right. Anything, like any ideas are, I love to talk to customers. I love to talk to people. I'm excited to talk to you guys about APIs today. So anybody who wants to have a conversation, I'm happy to do that.
It would be interesting to hear how you're doing your design, like what you've been learning doing this process of taking a design first approach. I think that this is an area where there's a lot more to be learned. And it just feels you can't talk enough about it. I hear some very few companies actually doing we listen to our customers and then we design our APIs thing. That's very, very rare, surprisingly rare. But then actually thinking about that from kind of like a UX and an interface design perspective, that's even more rare. Keep talking about that. That's important content for the community.
So I will say that you're completely right. And this is still pretty new to us. We really, like I said, we just pitched this right before the pandemic started to really start doing these workshops and really start looking at things from a business perspective. For the longest time, we were very much code first. People would write their services and then they'd write their open APIs at the end. But what we found is that the feedback that we were getting from internal consumers of the APIs was that they were hard to use. It was taking them a long time to stand up applications. And it wasn't just one or two teams that was saying this. Like, it became a chorus of people that were either complaining to me or complaining to, executive leadership. Like, it's taking us this long to build these solutions because the APIs are so hard to use. And, there's something to be said for starting with the microservices being like the lowest layer, the lowest building block. I think that that's not a terrible thing that we did. Like, it's not a bad thing at all, but those aren't necessarily the APIs that people want to build the applications from. Like, we need to have like another layer in there that says, is it the easier to use API, the API that somebody would have a much better experience with. So we started thinking about how we would approach this and what the best practices were. I read so many books and so many blogs because, to be honest, like, my background isn't design. My background was development, right, in engineering. These are also concepts that I hadn't really thought about as much. I was working in the guts of code. I wasn't really necessarily designing and architecting products from the beginning, let alone API products. So I had to kind of shift my thinking as well. Like, how do we build these things in a way that it makes other people able to build things much more easily? So you have to think about not just what's the value in building better APIs, but what's the end game for the people that are building on top of those. So I did a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, and I'll tell you the book that probably affected me the most was the Continuous API Management book. I don't know if anybody has read that one, but there was a chapter in there that talked about design thinking and product mindset and that kind of stuff. And that really resonated with me. I'm like, that's the thing that's missing. So we started pursuing that. We got the design team involved. And it was kind of funny because I was thinking this, and then I had a meeting with my senior vice president that was kind of in my chain, and he's like, what do you think about getting the design team involved? So it's like we were thinking top down and bottoms up that this is going to be a good idea. So we started talking to them, and they were more than on board. They were amazing. We did a product management summit for our entire product management division, and the design team came in and actually walked all of our product managers through an exercise around. They just picked a generic domain to work on. And they gave them a bunch of exercises to do around how to approach the modeling for the inputs and outputs. And I think it was really eye-opening for the product management team. We're not all the way there yet in terms of people really understanding what we want to do, but we're taking it team by team and working with them as they're ready to start building those better APIs. We want to get it right before we release the new APIs to customers, because as you guys know, once you let an API out in the wild, somebody's going to depend on it. So we want to make sure that we get it right, because even if it ended up that we could replace it with something better, somebody out there is going to want it to stay. So we're really trying to be mindful about this going forward.
I'm wondering if you have different personas that you are working with as part of the design process.
So for the most part, the main persona that we're looking at now is the business application developer, somebody that has knowledge of analytics but not expertise in SAS. If you wanted to use our microservices APIs today, like the low-level APIs, you would have to know a lot about SAS software, and you might have to know some about SAS programming, which is, not everybody off the street knows that stuff today. We want to make it simpler, where we want to abstract away some of that complexity and some of that knowledge that you currently have to bring to the table to use the microservices APIs. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
It's interesting to think about that. That makes a lot of sense, that you're targeting a developer that isn't necessarily an expert. I think sometimes people expose everything through their APIs, and in some cases that can be a mistake because there's complexity that the user has to deal with that they don't really need for most of what they're doing.
I think that you're right. And just to follow up on that, I think that we did that a lot with our microservice APIs because we were on these long release cycles for the longest time, where we wouldn't release a product for a year, maybe a year and a half. But we've recently, over the last year and a half, we've moved all of our operations to CI/CD. So we're doing continuous delivery internally and actually externally as well now. And that's given us an opportunity to say, you know what, you don't have to know everything about what this is going to look like from the beginning. You can just add as you go. You don't need to anticipate every possible use case for every possible persona from the beginning. And that's your only shot for multiple years. That really had been the thinking when I first came on. But this whole, using CI/CD and really embracing it is definitely causing a mind shift in the API design part as well.
Interesting. As an analytics company, have you done any dogfooding around your APIs? Are you using your own products for that?
Oh, certainly we are internally. We're using the APIs a lot. We have internal teams that are building solutions based on the VIA platform and leveraging the APIs a lot. I think we should do it more. And I also think that we will do it more when we make it a little easier, because even for internal folks, there is a learning curve because you have to know some of the SAS stuff today to be able to use some of the APIs. We have this partnership now with Microsoft where we're kind of looking at how we integrate with the Power Platform as well, and very interested in low-code integrations and that kind of thing. So we're looking also about how do we build APIs that can fit into these low-code platforms as well. I'm sort of drinking from the fire hose, trying to learn everything I can about Power Platform and low code as well, because now I've got that label kind of added on to my overall governance role. So, but it's very interesting because that's also another persona, right? We've got that persona of the low code person who maybe isn't using the API directly, but we want to be able to build these connectors to data sources and be able to create models very, very easily within these low-code platforms. And often there's some underlying API there, and we need to think about how do we make that simpler, or how do we make that fit into that ecosystem correctly. I'm not going to go into great detail about that because I'm literally just at the beginning of kind of learning what that's going to look like for SaaS. But that is something that I'm excited about. It's another way of thinking about it. When we were talking about personas, the other one I would add is data scientists. It's kind of weird because we have this kind of dichotomy between we want to make it easier for the business users, but for the data scientists, we kind of see them wanting to mess around with some of that lower level stuff and tweak that lower level stuff. I will say that from a design perspective, that's been a bit of a struggle historically, but now that we're kind of looking design first and thinking about fit to purpose APIs for different personas, I think that that's going to get better over time. I will say that my priority, or sort of the priority that I've been charged with, is more geared towards getting those business application developers enabled, because data scientists are used to dealing with more complexity, and they probably are more likely to know that lower level of SaaS than the business application developers would. But that is one that we also need to factor in, and we can't forget about the data scientists. They're part of our bread and butter.
One of the things that we've talked a lot about on the podcast is what we think that's coming is like this. So, you have the web interface and you've got the APIs. You have a different level still. You have like the microservices still under the APIs. But what about that space in between the APIs and the web interface? Like, we have a really good example here in Belgium is KBC Bank. And they have got a developer portal where they have like solutions for business developers and solutions for software developers. So the solutions for business developers, they're things like widgets and QR codes and stuff like that you don't have to do any development at all for, and you can like get started doing stuff. And they're kind of like building blocks similar to what you were describing that you're trying to do with your APIs, is creating these building blocks that people can use to create experiences, having these ready-made low-code or no-code building blocks that you can just drop into your website and it fulfills a function. Do you have something like that you're also already offering?
Not yet. Yes, but it's something that we're very, very much thinking about, just starting to think about, to be honest. Cool. But I think it's an emerging and growing space. The more that I've been starting to research it, it's weird. And I kind of struggled with this first because I'm used to thinking like you have to follow RESTful principles and you need to make sure that you've got all the, Hadios links and all that kind of stuff. But I'm seeing now that there are places where maybe that isn't necessary or those things aren't going to apply. And I'm starting to think about how do we either have another set of standards, because our standards are very much like you must follow RESTful principles, in building your APIs. But we're seeing other kinds of, just HTTP or streaming or even streaming interfaces emerge. And we're really starting to think about how do we involve those in our ecosystem in a way that's not going to be confusing to customers when we put this forward, or even to us internally going forward. We want to make sure that what we're doing makes sense from a product portfolio perspective. But like the advent of things like you're talking about with low code, no code, that's kind of going to make us rethink the advice that we're giving people based on who their target audience is. I feel like that was a non-answer, but
no, it's okay.
That was good. So at Pronovix, we're the dev portal company, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how the dev portal is really vital to an API program success. And one of the exercises that we go through when working with a client is creating personas and journey maps for the different user types, and recognizing that you're talking not only to developers, but you're talking to business people. And in your case, I was really glad you brought up the no-code, low-code, because Kristufek and I are really excited about it. And we've been asking almost every guest what they're thinking about this. So thinking about these different types of users, even if they end up at the same content, how you guide them to that content and the conceptual docs you give them around that content to get them to the APIs can be very different. And you might offer different bundles, groupings of APIs for different purposes and different personas. I shouldn't have said that in a prescriptive way. I was really trying to ask you if that jives with your thinking.
Yes, definitely. And I'm so glad that you brought up developer portals, because that's another thing I'm really excited about. I mentioned that we're hiring a whole bunch of people. And the reason is that we are doing a complete reimagining of our developer portal. And one of the things that kind of sold the business on needing to invest in that area was that we did an exercise with our new best friends on our design team to kind of do a full UX exploration of what this should look like and what the interactions should be with a developer portal based on the various personas. And they were amazing. They went out, and again, this was all during the pandemic as well. They went out and they did user interviews with people that we knew that were using the APIs and using our current developer portal. And to be honest, our current developer portal, if you've been to developer.sas.com, I'm proud of it, but I will also say that it is best effort maintained by two people that have 12 other jobs. So like it's been sort of that thing that we knew that needed attention, but trying to get the APIs right was the priority at SAS for a long time. But going back to the UX team and the design team, like they went out, scores of people they interviewed about the interactions with not just with the APIs, but with the developer portal, what people wanted to see, different personas. Like they talked to data scientists, they talked to business and application developers, they talked to the business side people that would be more in the decision maker role, developers, non-developers. They ran the gamut and they got all this information back, and they came back and they built this beautiful design for what the future of our developer portal is going to look like. And we pitched it to executive leadership right before Christmas, and we came back and they're like, yeah, we need to do this. So very excited about that. But I need people. I need builders. I'm not going to be able to pull this off myself. That's the key thing is, we need the builders. But to your point about different assets and different experiences for different personas, that's definitely at the heart of what we have to do, because we do need to cater to those different personas. And we also don't necessarily know what skill level people are going to be coming in with. If you're a startup, like there's a small set of people that are going to know your product, and they're probably all going to, if your product's very, very young, they're all going to probably be able to come up to speed pretty quickly. We have people that have been SaaS developers for, almost 40 years now, and they're going to want a different experience than people that just coming out of college and have never heard of SaaS, but they just want to get a sentiment score in their workflow. It's a very different experience, but we need to figure out how do we make it easy for either of those people to come in and find what they need quickly. So we're still doing user interviews. Every time they kind of add to the design, they're still working on it. We have a good baseline design, but there's all kinds of other things that we're thinking about that are coming up. One of the things that we just talked about was this idea of personalization and personalizing the developer portal experience based on, you give a certain criteria and said, I'm a SAS programmer. Well, then you get one experience. And if you're not a SAS programmer, then maybe you'll get a different experience, like a different set of blogs to go read to get started or something. We're thinking about all those things. And I think that's very important, because if you make assumptions about who your users are, you're going to fail somebody.
Yes. Have you already chosen what technology stack you want to develop in?
Oh man, that's the hardest part. No, and we've been looking at a number of different options. We have Adobe Experience Manager in-house, and there's definitely, that's what we use for all of our SaaS branded sites. And we're thinking about, should we continue that, or should we break with that tradition for developer portal? Because most developer sites that I've seen are sort of a riff on the branded sites, and I definitely see an alliance there. But I also do see that this could be an opportunity to build something completely different from the ground up. We're still trying to figure that out. We haven't come to a decision yet.
I just wanted to say that the work that you're doing with the usability and those user interviews, that is going to pay off in spades. You're doing what many companies complain that they don't have the resources to do. And so it's really cool that you guys are investing in that, because it's going to pay off. And that leads me to a question. We've talked with a variety of different types of leaders and different types of companies and different types of organizations. And for a non-software company, selling the API program usually is not something that comes very easily. There's a lot of education that you have to do about the value. I'm wondering, as a software company with a long history, what was your experience in selling the API program? When you talked about that presentation, yeah. Is my assumption that it comes easier? Is that true? Or
not sure.
So I've had two different experiences, and they were vastly different. My first experience was I worked on IBM API management that later became IBM API Connect. I came from a very, we have to be in the API space company. So when I left that experience and came to SAS, and they didn't really have an API program or a business strategy around it, it was mind-blowing to me, because I guess at that point in time, I was more really on the engineering side and not really looking at it from a business perspective. I just thought everybody was doing it, right? And so when I came to SAS and realized that they weren't yet doing it, I was surprised at first, and then I just started researching, and I realized that, okay, they're not alone, or we're not alone. I came into this role of lead API architect almost by accident. I was working on something that just ended up not being the right fit for me, and I was kind of a little bit bored in what I was doing at the time. And this came up, and the manager for that team somehow just he knew that I knew API stuff, and he's like, "You should apply for this job." And I'm like, I'm not qualified to be an overall API architect for the entire company. And he's like, you should just apply anyways. And it's definitely been a learning curve, because a lot of things that I had taken for granted, most technology companies would know about API, API economy and API programs, that those weren't really established yet at SAS. So I found myself doing some of the same pitches that we had to do for customers when I was working on API Connect. We'd go over to the briefing center, and we'd be giving these pitches about API economy. I didn't realize that this would be a thing that I would have to sell within SAS. Fortunately, there were a number of people that already got it and were backing this idea. It wasn't just me on a crusade. There were a lot of people that really understood that this was a strategic play for SAS. It was all about timing and priorities and figuring out where we wanted to move forward. Like I said, the transition from doing traditional waterfall development and multi-year release cycles to CI/CD, that was all consuming for a couple of years. So we swarmed on that, and everybody's just trying to get to the point where we can do CI/CD. So I understood that API as a focus, none of that could happen until we got the CI/CD stuff established. I had to temper my expectations and learn how to be patient and learn to understand really where our place was. Because I think we're still ahead in some ways of some other companies when I read about their transitions to API first and stuff. But at the same time, I'm just an impatient person, and I want this all to be wonderful and great and in front of customers tomorrow. So I'm excited about the direction that we're going. I guess that's a long way of saying it depends on where your company's at in their overall digital transformation journey, because APIs are just a part of that. We had to do a whole lot of foundational work to get to the point where APIs is starting to become the priority.
You're not alone. It's often the software companies that are worst, actually. I've seen several software companies, because they have this legacy integration stuff, and it's already kind of working. I've heard some companies that are basically saying well, we already have APIs, and then they're like, no, it's all just one-to-one integration stuff. There's no API products here. It's that the business of API thinking that is missing, because often developers will say, well, APIs, that's old news. We use APIs every day. What's the big deal here? But it's how does this change business? And that's that conceptual shift of creating building blocks for experiences that you could just drop into other places. That's completely radical new. And that takes more than just a shift in technology. It also takes a shift in business thinking. And it's there that I think software companies, it just takes a while for them to understand, oh, this is a whole different thing. often what I've heard is that software companies, they often wake up when they start getting RFPs. That's like, you need to have APIs. It's like, what? Okay. And then, like, where's your dev portal? We have had customers come to us like, we need a developer portal by next month because we've got this RFP that, we're not going to win if we don't have a developer portal. What can you do for us? So we've had stories like that. We're often the laggards. So
yeah, I think that you're totally right. Like the RFPs and then just the speed to build solutions. People ask questions like, why is it taking so long for you to build a solution on top of the platform? And they're like, the APIs, like it's hard to figure out how to cobble together the right ingredients to build the cake, right? And people are struggling with that. And I think we had enough people say like, this could be easier in addition to me. I tend to write like these manifestos about how I think the thing should look. But I'll be honest, it really wasn't until we started getting the feedback from the field about what we had already and how much better it could be that we started getting the investment and, also getting all that feedback from like, oh man, I cannot advocate enough for using your design team if you have one, or if you don't have a design team, starting to understand, how to leverage UX philosophy and design thinking philosophies to gather data. Like we're a data-driven company, so getting that data and getting those quotes from people that are using the APIs. Before the pandemic, we would have people go into the usability lab and they would actually film them trying to navigate our developer portal. And I think they used that in one of the executive presentations that helped sell this is that, how many page clicks do you have to get through to find the API that you're looking for? I can't advocate for that enough, for sure.
That can be so painful to watch when it's your product that you've been working on. It's really, really helpful though.
Oh, it is.
You learn so much.
I feel bad like as a subject in something like that. Like I'm like, oh, am I stupid? Like, or, but if I feel like that, is a customer going to feel that way coming to the portal? And like, I don't want that customer to feel stupid. I want that customer to find what they need and easily. So it's hard because sometimes you have to put yourself through some pain to see really what the situation is.
That's certainly true.
Where do you think this whole thing is going? Like this whole API ecosystem, because you've seen it from a couple of different angles now. Where do you see this going?
Like as an industry, you mean? Like in general, where are APIs going? So it's kind of an interesting thing where APIs are really the foundation of everything that we do today, but nobody talks about them like that. They talk about the sites and they talk about, shopping carts and integrations and things like that, but they never use the word API. I think it's going to continue to be like this underlying foundation. I think the technologies are going to evolve over time. Like we already, REST has been our priority for the longest time, but I think that we're going to start looking at other kinds of API styles and interactions in the future. I don't know where we're headed, but I think it's somewhere great. And I don't think we're going anywhere. I think we're just going to become more prominent. I think that one of the hardest parts about getting people to understand why APIs are important is because they've felt so invisible and people don't really get, how important they are to our everyday lives today. Like I wouldn't be talking to you if there weren't APIs, right? To be able to do this. My kids wouldn't be able to get on their Zoom calls and, chat with their friends while they're supposed to be doing school every day, if there weren't APIs. I don't know where we're going, but I think it's going to be someplace wonderful, and they're just going to increase in importance going forward. I'm very excited about the low code, no code stuff though, because I think that will democratize the use of APIs, even if they're not calling them APIs. They're all based on APIs. I think that's going to democratize this notion of having those building blocks for a whole new ecosystem of developers or not developers, aspiring developers out there that maybe don't have those computer science skills. I'm very excited about where that's going to go.
I like to think about it as like the information highway, that the APIs are the information highway. And right now, all we have is buses with bus drivers. So we need the developers to drive us to where we want to go, because you can't get on the highway if you're just an individual. I think what the world is waiting for is like your personal car that you can take onto the information highway. So to go where you want to go without all the things that you don't want to get as part of that experience that otherwise would be built for you. I don't know if low no code as it is currently envisioned is the way forward to that. Why, this is the age-old question of the distributed or the centralized web all over again. It's like, are we going to have a centralized experience of low no code, or is this going to become a distributed experience of low no code? Yeah, I don't know, because the web went to the centralized experience, although we're kind of somewhere in the middle again, I guess. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where they're not going away. I do kind of feel like the sea change in the way that people are thinking about them and what they could be and what the future could be. And I don't know, but I think it's going to be exciting and that we're all going to have jobs for a long time because they're not going anywhere.
There's a lot of work. A similar thing happens also in the IoT space with like the explosion of devices that stop functioning because the company that's behind them doesn't have the money anymore to maintain the APIs that they had foreseen as part of the product. And it's this, all this frustration that is being caused by this disjointed, monopolized experience landscape. It's interesting to see where we'll end up with.
It's kind of weird because there have been a couple times in my career where I've been considering working on something that's not API related. I'm like, I'm just sick of APIs. I don't want to work on these APIs anymore. It's not all I ever do. But it's changing and evolving enough that it's staying interesting, right? Like, I think that's a great area of technology to be in where you're constantly learning and you're constantly seeing new opportunities to use the technology in different ways or evolving technologies to try out and play with. There's no end to the learning to do with APIs, and there's no end to things that you will be able to do with APIs. So I'm happy in this space for now. Like I've tried to leave a couple times, but I always end up coming back.
They keep pulling me back in.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that way. That's okay. I'm very interested. One of the other things that's really cool is that I don't know if I've seen a community, if you go out to Twitter or LinkedIn or just go to conferences and stuff, there's such a cool community of people that are excited about this. And I'll see people tweet out about new articles or new ways of framing things that are happening in the API space. And I just get so excited. They're almost like rock stars to me. Like I see these people's names. I went to, there's a conference in Nashville a couple of years ago. I was there and I met Ken Lane and I was like, oh my God, you're the API evangelist. Like I remember the quote of his in the very first book that I ever read about APIs was API, A Strategy Guide, which was the O'Reilly book, like a thin O'Reilly book back in 2012 or 13. And I remember a quote in there from him. And that was one of the things that made me excited to work in this space. And then I met him and it was like meeting this rock star person. It was weird. I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. It was very, very cool and almost surreal. I could only aspire to be that inspiring. Like it was very, like all the stuff that he's written, all the stuff that comes out of Nordic APIs that comes out of your company as well. I've used so many articles about docs as code and the importance of the docs, because that was another thing that we had struggled with early on at SAS, was just getting our documentation team engaged with APIs and, at first to start editing, but we also want them to help write the content because they know the outside in audience perspective better than our developers do today. And that was something that we were really lacking. All these different inspirations coming from different spaces. I hope at some point to be able to pay it forward or pay it back at some point. I'm just trying to get things on track.
You're doing it already.
You're absolutely doing it right
now. Why I'm excited about the API space is because it's redefining what it is to be human. I have a hope, I want to believe that when we'll be a few decades from now, that we'll look back and say, this actually allowed us to be more human. And it's dehumanizing in some areas. The technology, to some extent, can be a dehumanizing factor. But I want to believe that by reducing the friction and by reducing the cost of communication, of like some of the road communication that we have to do to be able to just get stuff done, that will create more space again for more human interaction. And also that it will change the way that we can collaborate and cooperate, where we have certain ways of doing things that were just forced on us because of just the limitations of our communication technologies. And that now with these new communication technologies that we'll be able to take this power and turn it into something that helps us to become more human again. But it's the verdict is still out. It's,
yeah. I like that idea, though. I've long thought one of the things that I like about the idea of APIs and the idea of connectivity and integration is that the intent is really to bring things together and break down silos. I mean, it's all about communication. like foundationally, it is about the ability for systems or people to communicate with each other. And I think that it's amazing that when I was a kid in the 80s, if this pandemic had happened, there would have been, I could call my grandparents on the phone, right? But I wouldn't be able to see them for that period of time unless they mailed me a photograph, which is crazy, right? Whereas my kids can see their grandparents on a Zoom call every Sunday and, misbehave in the background, but they can at least see them and have that experience with them that I never would have been able to do when I was their age as a kid. So that's all possible because APIs are the things that are coursing under the covers that connect us to each other. And I think that's really cool. I mean, there's a lot to be said for like the machine-to-machine communication and all that too. But like even that, all of this is to break down silos. All of this is to spawn innovation. Nobody knows everything. Like I don't care. Like if you think you know everything, you're wrong. Like nobody knows everything. And when we can bring these different things, different technologies together, different people together, that's when innovation happens. That's when amazing things start to get built. I'm very keen on anything that connects people and connects things and connects ideas. And I think APIs are at the heart of a lot of that.
I told you, Jeannie, we were going to get into the API philosophy, and here we are.
You tricked me, man.
I have another question for you. I actually have two. One is at SAS, when you are engaging your API team with the designers, what groups internally do you involve in your API program?
So right now we have like a circle diagram that we have for the API lifecycle. So I'm going to be thinking about this circle as I'm walking around. So we involve product management and UX design and visual design if there's an UI that's going to be sitting on top of that. And any interface that would be connected with that API, like we would involve the people that are responsible for designing that as well. Development, stakeholders as well. API governance, which is really my area. Let's see who comes after that. The testers, anybody that's going to be responsible for testing our APIs. And then we have a release engineering team that's responsible for the deployment of these microservices. They may or may not be involved. It depends on whether they're not going to be users. Really what we want are stakeholders, people that are going to use the APIs. So release engineering may or may not be involved at that point. And then users like that. I mean, that I'm thinking around this cycle. So it's going to be product management, design, development, test, and governance, and then the users. And from a governance perspective, we have an overall team we call our API First core team. Kind of buzzy to call ourselves the API First team, but we wanted people to start thinking about API first. So that's what we call ourselves. Oh, documentation. I missed documentation on that circle. They're involved too.
The second question I had for you is, do you have an internal developer portal? We started off talking about dog fooding and what are you doing there? Some companies are all over internal dev portals. Some companies say, no, our internal users use the external portal. And then there's this whole other area that Kristufek has spent time in called inner sourcing, which is quite interesting, where you're working in a very large distributed organization, sharing code and APIs and contributing internally. So I'm kind of wanting to understand where you are in that process.
I'm not going to dignify it by calling it a developer portal. We have an internal API catalog today that Somebody could go out and find all of our documented internal APIs that we're currently using today. We primarily use that. It's a GitLab repository that has all of the open API docs in it, any sort of supporting markdown files that would have additional content about the APIs. And then we produce a very simple API catalog where you can get that information and have it rendered using either Redoc or Swagger UI. It's not super sophisticated. Our longer term plan is that we want the new developer portal vision that we're working on. We want that to kind of use that same design for whether or not you're an internal customer or an external customer. I talked about the personalization a little bit earlier. Like somehow know if you're an internal SAS employee, then you can see those internal APIs. But if you're an external or customer or somebody just browsing the developer site, that you would be able to see just the subset of APIs that were deemed blessed to be made external at the time. Again, we are still talking about whether we would want separate sites internally or externally, and the personalization thing would be optimal or not. It would be nice to only have to maintain one site, to be honest. We've always had the API catalog, but I wouldn't call it a developer portal.
Mhm.
It's interesting that you mentioned InnerSource, because one of the highlights of last year is we had a sales team come to us that was interested in trying to provide more context and use cases and samples for some of our APIs that we have out on our existing developer portal today. And we have a developer advocate named Joe Furby at our company that sort of spearheaded this collaboration between this SMB sales team and our API first team. And they put together a whole bunch of different use cases, and they're going to write blogs, and they're going to put sample code out that will hopefully, because we have these low level APIs, that will hopefully, give people more breadcrumbs to be able to use the existing APIs while we work on these newer APIs that we're really targeting. We do have a number of published APIs on developer.sas.com today, but those are those microservice APIs. Those are those lower level APIs, and they're not going to go away. And once you make something public, and you can't just take it down for, people are going to depend on it. So we do still need to make sure that there are things that we can do to make those better while we're still working on like this bigger overarching strategy of the better APIs. That's great. But the really cool thing about that is that we had another team that really wanted to help. And because of their excitement, because of their motivation, now we have other people that are interested in contributing samples and code snippets and that kind of thing.
Nice.
So I think InnerSource can be really, really great if you have people that are motivated to help contribute to it.
It's one of the hardest questions that were when on the InnerSource conferences, they're always talking about like, how do you get people to work with you? And how do you get this thing off the ground?
It's hard.
No.
Especially, if it's not part of your job to contribute to InnerSource.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just easier to do it in your silo, right? And I totally get that. I've been there. It's almost like a cultural thing. You have to start thinking about the greater good and the impact that you could have if you made something that could benefit more people rather than just your own team.
It's like one of the dark patterns though that I've seen is like, so you should just do your job, and then in the evenings you contribute to our InnerSource initiative, which is like, come on, are you kidding me?
Yeah. I have an 8-year-old and 11-year-old that I don't have time for that. I would love to do that. That would be so fun, but people need to be able to have lives too. And if it matters to what you're doing and your strategy as a company, people will do it. Like kind of this cultural thing in your mind to say, or also have some sort of incentive to say, like, at the end of the year, you talk about what your impact was to the org. Well, it's a lot better to say, like, I wrote this tool that benefited my team versus I wrote this tool that benefited all of my company, right? Like it's good for you to contribute to InnerSource. I don't know. So I think some people are nervous to get more eyes on their code, or shy, or I don't know.
Sometimes it's just, are you okay with being challenged?
Yeah.
Like, do you have the energy for it? So it's not even, are you okay with it, but do you actually have the energy at this point in time to be challenged? Because you will not dictate when people come to challenge your work. It's just going to happen. And you might not be ready for that. And if you're going through a low energy period, or if you're more an introvert, maybe that's not what you want to do. That might be one of the things against it.
I agree. It's very company cultural, and creating the factors that you just talked about, Kristuf, and that you were talking about, Jeannie, those are very true. To me, this is one of the holy grail of code reuse has been sought after for so long. APIs, that's the right way to do it. This is the best way. And engineers, developers love to have their code used. They hate to write something that's not used. And so through inner sourcing, if you can create some kind of virtuous cycle where, say, you had some analytics, where you could show people where their code is being used, I think that is a big motivator for people.
That's one of the things that I'm excited about with kind of the idea of really putting some of our APIs out into the world, is that we can get data like through API management and monitoring and stuff. Like, we can really understand how people are using those APIs from a code reuse perspective. Like what you're saying about the energy and that kind of thing, I totally get it. Like, there are times where I'm like, I will write a bunch of code and I'll put it in a personal repository, but I know it's not ready for prime time. And then, I know somebody else could use it. It's like this fragmented experience of where you may or may not have time to make something enterprise ready or meet whatever requirements of the inner source are required for that project. Simplification and tools and giving people guardrails to build things to inner source, I think that helps too. But then you need tool makers and you need people that are going to contribute to those too. But the companies that are doing it right, I think, end up being able to build things faster because they have that idea in the back of their brain that they can make these things reusable. I think you called it a holy grail. I'd love to get there too.
I think to some extent, it's also, I really love the team topologies. It's a book from the DevOps community. And they're breaking this down and saying like, well, it's all about cognitive load. Like you need to reduce cognitive load. And I think this is also when APIs work really well, they abstract a bunch of cognitive load away and they don't let you fail. So there's a functionality that's just working and you won't fail if you just use it properly. And then which allows a team to work with a lot less cognitive load because all this complex stuff is now abstracted away. What I think is going to be very interesting to see is how does this evolve? Because it's, to some extent, this is very conscious architecting of organizations and their information infrastructure. Maybe using Conway's law in reverse, like changing the teams so that the software is actually going to be following the pattern that you're trying to design versus stuff that just bubbles up and that is just built from bottom up and that people just start doing. It's fascinating. Probably a whole lifetime can be spent just exploring this stuff. And I guess this is what we're about to do right now as an ecosystem, is how can we use APIs to become more adaptive? How can we create adaptive organizations that are using all these technologies and all these innovations to change things up? I think we've overrun our time mark already a little bit.
Yeah, we've kept you on the phone for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's only because you were really interesting.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Jeannie, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. And I would love to see you present some of the topics that we talked about, but didn't really have time to dig into as deeply as we would have liked to at one of the API, the Docs conferences, because I think you've got a lot of knowledge and learning and sharing that people would be very interested in hearing.
Well, thank you for saying that. I hesitate because like a lot of things that we're working on and a lot of things that are starting to go really well for us, they're not customer visible yet. Like you can't go out and see the transformation that's happening. So I've been very hesitant to go out and talk about it yet. And then you reached out about the podcast and I'm like, oh man, like we're doing some really cool stuff. We should talk about it. And I talked to people internally and they're like, it's okay to talk about, just don't promise promise anything yet. but you can talk about it. And I go out and like I said, I read a lot of blogs and articles and tweets and, about what other people are doing in the industry. So I'm thinking, well, everybody's doing that. Nobody's going to want to hear from me. So that's nice to hear. And, if people find this inspiring, maybe I will make more of an effort to do that.
The design thing, That's gold right there. And there's never enough stories about that, because I think we need a lot more stories like that as an industry. I would strongly encourage you to share that story. It would be a fantastic talk. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Okay, awesome.
And plenty of the other stuff also, but I think that's it.
Thank you, Kristuf, for being co-host with me on this. Jeannie, just a delight to talk to you today, and I hope that our paths cross again.
It was a pleasure.
All right.
You're a fantastic guest.
Thank you, Jeannie. It was great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
It's our hope that you were encouraged by today's story and picked up some insights that will help you navigate your digital transformation and make your API program more successful. If you have questions or feedback on the podcast, we invite you to email us at info@prenovix.com. Thanks for listening.